Join you.
Welcome, everyone, to the Global Gambit podcast, a show that looks at the intersection of geopolitics, economics, international relations, and war, and particularly returning to the situation on the war in Iran. Now, we had a very interesting conversation with Professor Vali Nasser of Johns Hopkins SAIS, but just down the road is a very respected institution called the CSIS, or Center for Strategic and International Studies. And I'm very, very lucky to be joined by Colonel Mark Kansian, who is a senior advisor with the CSIS Defense and Security Department, and someone who, well, he's an expert on many different things, you can see from all the papers behind him. But he's particularly, I think, well placed to tell us a bit more about the Strait of Hormuz, maritime security, and how would it actually work for us to see the US secure the Strait, and is that what Trump intends to do with this ominous 8 o'clock deadline that we have coming up in the next few hours? I'm in London, so I think it's in about, what time is it for you? It's about 1 o'clock for you, right? It's near to Colonel, so in about 7 hours time. But I think that the first question I would like to get your take on is simply Trump's latest tweets today. When he talks about civilization, destruction and dying and all that, what is that cryptic talk? Or should we read that through a strategic lens, or is he getting frustrated with the lack of progress?
Yeah, the president's language is beginning increasingly apocalyptic, and this latest message was the most extreme of all of his threats to Iran. Although from the very beginning they've been talking about unleashing hell and various other colorful phrases. I think that the president is in an unsustainable position. The Strait is, of course, controlled by Iran. Most of the traffic isn't moving. The United States and the rest of the world need to do something. And Trump has, as I see it, four options. One is escalate the air war, and that's what he has threatened to do by attacking bridges and power stations. He could force the Strait with a military operation. He could continue negotiations. We've seen that several times in the recent past. That is, that President Trump threatens air attacks and violence, and the Iranians say, "Well, we'll have some negotiations," and negotiations go on for a while and they go nowhere, and then we go through the cycle again. He could do that yet again, or he could declare victory and go home. A week ago, he gave a press conference. He seemed to be headed in that direction. Not so more recently. So we'll see what happens this evening. But forcing the Strait is one of those possibilities. And I think there are two interesting things about that. The first is that, unlike much of the community, I think it's doable, though with casualties. But the second thing is that the Navy has been woefully unprepared to do it, and that has been a major failure on the part of the U.S. Navy.
So your ethos goes against a lot of what the prevailing narrative would assume, that it isn't capable, that the US is not in a good position to do this, because also of the risk is posed by the IRGC, their ability to strike US assets if they were to try to manage the Strait. So could you explain a little bit more how this would work theoretically?
Yeah. Forcing the Strait would be a major military operation. It would involve mine sweeping. It would involve escorting tankers or commercial ships. It would have possibly ground forces seizing some of the islands in the Strait. It would have maybe U.S. air and missile defense in Oman on the peninsula there. Army helicopters flying to take out speedboats and drones, and then of course a lot of aircraft overhead to protect against missiles, drones. So with major combat operations, but I think if you put that all together, and maybe put in the front of the convoy an old tanker in ballast as a backup, fail-safe mine clearer, I think it's doable. And the thing is, we don't really know how much opposition the Iranians can put up. They have been very threatening, but we don't know. When we look at what they've been able to do against the Gulf states, for example, they've been able to inflict some damage, but not really significant. Those societies are still operating. Their oil facilities are still operating. It may be that it's easier than we thought. It might be very, very difficult, in which case maybe we would do it once and not again. But once the first convoy gets through, that would change the psychology. And it might then be a situation where the shipping companies were willing to risk their ships with additional indemnification by the U.S. government, which President Trump has offered, and which would be reasonable. That is, because the risk would be higher. The United States would pick up the costs of insurance or losses.
So I want to ask you a little about the U.S. Navy in a second, but on the Iranian side, since you referenced it, what is the extent of damage to the Iranian Navy? What is left? What can they do? What couldn't they ever do but claim they could?
Yeah. The Iranian Navy has essentially ceased to exist. The United States has blown up every ship it can find, and they're down to very small ships. What gives them leverage is that mines can be placed by a wide variety of ships. It could be fishing ships that are disguised. It could be speedboats. They can't lay very many mines, but it's the nature of mine warfare that just a few may be enough of a threat to deter action.
Okay. Now, there's been a lot of emphasis on the US and their overarching dominance, but to be devil's advocate, hasn't there been some concerns about some of the assets the US has? There's been a carrier, one of the aircraft carriers has been being repaired because of a fire, if I understand correctly. There's so much news coming out that, frankly, I've forgotten the details. But what is the state of the US Navy in the Gulf, and also in, I think, the Eastern Mediterranean? There's some assets.
Well, the United States has a big part of its naval power in the region. Maybe 50% of all deployed ships are now in the region. It has two carriers. Of course, the Ford had to be pulled out because of this fire in a laundry room. But Lincoln is still on station, and the United States has a lot of other air power with the Air Force there. We have a large number of surface combatants. We had two submarines that fired a lot of their Tomahawks. They may have gone back to port to reload. So the United States has considerable assets. And one place where they're very weak is on mine clearance. There were three mine clearance vessels. These are the mine clearance version of the LCS. They were in Bahrain. They were pulled out early in the war, and are now held outside of the strait. This has been a weakness in the U.S. Navy for a long time. Part of it is planned. We thought we would always go to war with our allies and partners, and they had excellent mine sweeping capabilities. But part of it is just the fact that the U.S. Navy doesn't pay a lot of attention to mine warfare, despite years of exhortation by many commentators. So that part is very weak. The other part's quite strong.
Now, there's been a recent UN resolution that failed due to the veto of China and Russia, and it was on the emphasis of ensuring safe passage, defense of the or encouraging defensive coordinated efforts to secure the Strait of Hormuz. 11 countries voted in favor, 2 abstained: Pakistan and Colombia, and Russia and China vetoed it. So if you are unaware of that, or if you were aware of it, either way, what's your initial reactions to that?
The UN has not been a major player in recent conflict resolution. They've been virtually absent from the Ukraine war, and not been a major player here. Of course, the negotiations have been carried on through third parties like Pakistan and Turkey, and the fact that they can't get a resolution through is, I think, one piece of evidence that they are stalemated in situations like this.
But more specifically, that this was a resolution drafted by the Gulf states. It was the Bahrain's foreign minister chaired the meeting. I'm more curious what you feel about the efforts by the countries that are most affected to try to get this pushed through, and the fact that the Russians, and more interestingly to me at least, the Chinese, have decided to reject it. Why would they do that, and what does it mean for the security of the strait, or it doesn't matter?
One of the side effects of the war, and I think one of the unintended side effects by Iran, is that it has driven the Gulf states into a closer alliance with the United States, and ironically into an informal alliance with Israel. I think the Iranians attacked the Gulf states thinking that these attacks would split them off from the United States. Years ago, that had been a theory, and certainly during Desert Storm, it had been a concern, but that didn't happen. In fact, the opposite happened. They attacked the Gulf states, and the Gulf states pulled closer to the United States. Now they're signed agreements for arms shipments, binding them even closer to the United States. And I think that what happened in the UN then is more illustrates that. That is, the Gulf states are now seen as part of the American, the U.S. Group, and the Gulf states are seen as part of the American coalition, and therefore opposed by Russia and China.
In essence, therefore, should we be calling this the third Gulf War or the second Gulf War then?
That's interesting. The third Gulf War.
Well, some people say second, some people say third. I haven't seen variations at all.
But it is. I think it's fair to describe it that way. Some people have said that this is a world war. It's not a world war. It's pretty much confined to the region. Of course, there are effects that go beyond the region, but the fighting itself, the conflict, and the adversaries are in the region, except for the United States, of course, which has its forces moved into the region. So I think it's fair to call it, another Gulf War, whichever number you want to attribute to it.
Okay, no, that's a tricky question. I wasn't sure you might respond to that. But okay, obviously you referenced the growing cooperation or coordination between the Gulf states and America, but obviously Europe and Trump's rhetoric towards Europe or NATO specifically. I'm very curious what you make of that. Is it something that's overblown with the media hysteria? Is it significant? Europe's, well, for two ways, Trump's comments, but also Europe's positioning.
Yeah. There's an irony here that Trump begins the war saying we don't need them, they're weak, we can do it ourselves. And then he gets into the war and says, well, why aren't you helping us? And then comes back and says, well, we really don't need your help after all. But the fact that you're not helping us just makes you look bad. So he's sort of all over the map on this one. There's no question this is another damaging incident between the United States and Europe. Of course, we've had many of them. The Secretary General of NATO has been masterful in bridging over the tensions. The Europeans have a good argument here that NATO is not designed. In fact, specifically forbidden by the insistence of the United States from getting involved in these kinds of regional conflicts. When the alliance was first formed, the United States didn't want to get involved in the colonial wars of France and Great Britain. So it was limited to Europe. Now, there have been agreements to operate elsewhere. Of course, NATO forces have operated in Afghanistan, for example, but it was not designed for that. It's, the alliance will survive, and Trump will get over it. But there's no question, there's been a lot of damage, when you look at, Greenland and what's happened here, and, much of the rhetoric, and that's unfortunate because I think it's in the U.S. interest to have a strong NATO alliance. But there's an element of the White House that is just contemptuous of the Europeans and regards any damage to the alliance as to the good.
I mean, I'm a self-described transatlanticist, but I'm also a Europeanist, and I like to believe in the relationship remaining. But you emphasize damage, Trump will get over it. But can we really assume that? Can we safely believe that he will just move on again and sort of the NATO will survive? I mean, I know it's not that simple. You have the National Defense Authorization Act, but how far could this go, the relationship between these two sides, and therefore implications on maritime security globally?
And I have to say, I don't know. I mean, I hope that the damage eases off, and that maybe the White House, President Trump, come to realize just how useful alliances can be, and in fact that's one of the U.S.'s greatest advantages in competition with Russia and China. But you can't tell. So I'm not going to make predictions. The administration has not been entirely consistent over the year that they've been back. So I'm just going to leave it there.
Fair enough. It's not an easy question, but I like to throw some curveballs occasionally. Now, retrospectively, a lot of people reference Suez Canal and 56. And I'm interested, from your perspective as someone who knows history, how much could this become a real quagmire for the US? Assuming that it goes, I don't know, relatively okay, but could it still be a problem that they get stuck in the Strait? Or, I mean, I want to come to Carg Island in a moment and the broader Gulf, Persian Gulf, but I don't know, what lessons from history do you draw in relation to what we're seeing right now?
Well, we have to see how this war ends. That is, the expectation has been that it wouldn't last very long, and of course that was the administration's expectation. I think it's gone a lot longer than they had expected. I don't see them going for months, partly because of their ideology. Both the national security strategy and national defense strategy talk a lot about not getting involved in overseas conflicts and not getting bogged down in quagmires. And there's really no reason for the war to go on for extended periods. There are solutions that could be achieved. Having said that, hard to say exactly when it will end, but I don't see it as a quagmire in the sense that we'll get bogged down for years. And with high force levels, the number of troops that are involved is relatively small, although the military assets, aircraft and ships, are relatively large.
Well, that's the thing that I find confusing, because we've got a significant amount of troop numbers being reallocated. We're seeing some assets from Asia being redeployed to the Middle East. And some people like to speculate that this is all part of some grand strategy against China. Trump removes Venezuela, he removes Iran, and therefore it weakens China's energy supplies, which I find far-fetched. But I don't know, why deploy so many things to the region unless you intend to use them, unless it's all for posturing?
Well, no, I mean, that's what I have believed from the beginning, that once they had deployed all these forces, they would need to use them, and then they did. Now, the Naval forces have not been used to force the strait. Of course, they have been used for ground attacks, both aircraft and missiles, and some for air and missile defense. So we've used some of the naval capabilities, but used a lot of the air capabilities and air defense capabilities in the Air Force and the Army. So we have used a lot of what we sent to the Gulf. And as you said, we needed to either use it or disperse it, and the president decided to use it.
Okay, and so Colonel, I do want to come to Karg Island a little bit, because it seems to be, if there is going to be movement, shall we say, action over the at 8 p.m. EST, whatever people like to say, speculation over nuclear weapons as well. What would that entail? Would it be special ops, taking out specific parts of Karg Island's production facilities? Would it be to occupy the island and try to use it as a negotiating tool? Where do you see this going?
Yeah. Karg Island is not that hard to seize. It's about 3 by 5 miles, about 25 miles off the coast. So it can be isolated by air power. And isolated means it's not that no speedboat could get through in the middle of the night, but it means that large-scale reinforcement and resupply would be very difficult. It's mostly oil facilities, and there's one airstrip in the, I think, northeast corner. The United States could seize it with amphibious forces, the Marines. They'd have to get the amphibious ships into the Persian Gulf, and of course that means getting them through the strait. That might be difficult. They could try a shore-to-shore amphibious assault, leaving from Kuwait, for example, and then landing on Karg Island. They could use paratroopers. Paratroopers are a little risky because they like to have a link up with paratroopers, because paratroopers are so lightly armed that they're very vulnerable. Linking up with either a mobile ground force or an amphibious force or something is much preferable. But that could be done. They could maybe seize the airport and then bring in aircraft. There are lots of ways they could do it, and I think it's all quite doable. A lot of people are concerned about holding the island. I don't think that's as much of a problem as is often made out, and the reason is that craft, ships can go to and from Kuwait, for example. You can use high-speed craft. But the notion that the Iranians would pound the island, I think that's overdrawn, because remember, the island is almost all oil facilities. And if I were the Marines, I would just move into the oil facilities and tell the Iranians, okay, you want to go after us? You're going to have to destroy your oil industry to do it. So I don't think it's as hard as is sometimes made out. But I would note, this is a combat operation. It's a major combat operation, and that there would be casualties. This would not be a bloodless operation.
But is it worth it?
That's a difficult economic and political question. That's not a military question. The great value of taking Karg Island is that the United States would then essentially control the Iranian oil industry, and that would give them a lot of latitude, of leverage against the Iranians. Even if the straits stayed closed, the United States could determine what tankers went there, where the tankers went after that, who got the money. It would give them a lot of leverage. It wouldn't necessarily be a war-ending operation, but it might. It might give us enough leverage against the Iranians that the Iranians agree to some concessions.
Well, I mean, I wanted to get your take on how Trump likes to conduct military operations whilst attempting to negotiate. That seems to be a very common theme amongst his approach to foreign policy. But how would this work, though? How would you get troops they're going to go through the strait itself. You've done plenty of war games. CSIS is very respected for the war games and scenarios that they do. So how can you, I don't know, really dumb it down for me?
Yeah.
How does this work step by step?
Well, there are three things that the United States could do for an amphibious operation. And one is to push the amphibious ships through the strait, with escorts. And then again, this would be a major combat operation, just like a tanker convoy, except now you would have an amphibious ship convoy. You could even take the Marines off ahead of time and fly them up to Kuwait if you wanted to do that. But there's a lot of risk to that because, of course, there's all the dangers of Iranian defenses. But it's possible, particularly if it were the second convoy through. If the first one were some tankers and ballast or something like that. You could send the what are called the LCACs. These are the air-cushioned landing craft. You could send them through the straits. They're smaller. They're very fast, 40 knots, much harder to hit. They won't set off the mines. So you could send them through and then use those, send them up to Kuwait, fly the Marines in, and then launch a amphibious operation that way. Or you could just round up a bunch of ships in Kuwait and put Marines on them and send them that way.
But doesn't that make Kuwait complicit to the conflict and then at complete vulnerability to, massive strikes from the Iranians?
I mean, Kuwait is already totally complicit in this operation. We have hundreds of but we've got dozens of airplanes operating out of Kuwait. We've got forces on the ground. They're fully in, as are essentially all of the Gulf states now. So whatever the Iranians could do against Kuwait, I think they've done.
So what can the Iranians do? I know you're not an aerial expert, and if there's anyone you recommend at CSIS to speak to about the aerial campaign side, that would be very interesting. But to what extent can we guarantee that the Iranians don't have significant capability to threaten the US, be it coming from Kuwait with Marines or through the strait, pushed through a convoy, as you said?
Well, two things. First, you can't guarantee anything. The estimates are that half of their ballistic missiles have been used. The other half might be available. They might be also buried in warehouses that are underground. The reason I am not as worried, I think, as many other people are, is that the number that have been fired recently, day by day, are not very large. Now, it's possible that the Iranians are husbanding their inventory, but we haven't seen large numbers launched, and that tells me that their inventories are limited. So no guarantees. But on the other hand, I also, maybe a third point, is that in the first couple of days of the war, when they launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles, even over 1,000, our defenses were pretty good, weren't perfect. That's when we took most of our casualties, but they were pretty good. And if they had enough for one last spasm like that, we could ride it out.
I have to admit that I am very surprised by how quietly confident you seem about this, or that the willingness of the lack of risk. Of course, there'll be casualties, but I guess you're taking a very cold, hard military lens to it, not a sort of moral, political one.
And that's the military's job, to lay out the options. And I hope that that's what they're doing with the president. They say, okay, we can do that. Here are the risks. And there are going to be casualties. They might go from, a couple dozen to 100. And then the president's going to decide whether that's worthwhile.
But can I ask you, in your professional opinion, do you think that he is in the best position, given what he's saying, maybe it's a negotiating strategy. I'm not asking you to be a psychologist, but do you think that he is in the best frame of mind to be making potentially as significant military decisions as these, which could be significant, whether or not it's as big as people claim or more relatively low, as you suggest? Do you think he has the right positioning to make such decisions?
My response to that is the American people elected him very strongly, and they made the judgment that they wanted him to make these decisions. And under our constitutional system, he gets to make them. So, from the point of view of the military, and whether he's able or not able, the American people have decided. Now, I mean, I could offer my personal opinion if I were president, but I'm not.
Fair enough. I guess my last question for you, Colonel, and I appreciate your candidness in your responses as well, is simply, where do you think this goes? From 8 p.m. tonight, do you think anything's going to happen, or is it going to be more of a negotiating strategy? And if something does happen, to what extent could it go up the escalation ladder or be relatively moderate compared to what Trump's suggesting?
Yeah. I get a lot of questions like this. I've made bets with some of my buddies about what's going to happen. One says that he'll launch the airstrikes. One says that he'll taco, and I said that I think he's going to go after the bridges, but that's all for now. That he'll do something, but go after the target set that is maybe least disruptive of Iranian life. But no one knows. We're going to be watching at 8 o'clock to see what happens. I outlined at the very beginning of our discussion about what I saw as the 4 options for President Trump, and we'll see which path he takes.
And I guess bonus question, if I may be cheeky enough,
Sure.
Depending upon what Trump decides, what should we expect from the Iranians or the Israelis, or nothing much matters because the US is the commanding military in this matter?
The Iranians always respond, and if there is a intensified bombing campaign, you can expect to see a wave of drone and missile attacks. If with the Israelis, I don't think you'll see anything. I mean, just because they're already doing a lot. Of course, if there are negotiations, then there won't be a Iranian military response.
All right. Well, Colonel Mark Kansian of CSIS, thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to stay on this stream to continue with another guest that I have joining shortly. But I will certainly look forward to hosting you back. Hopefully we can talk in more favorable circumstances. Yes, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. But we'll speak to you soon. Take care. But everyone, that was Colonel Mark Kansian of the CSIS, or Center for Security and International Studies in Washington. He's a very respected maritime and historian, strategist, I guess would be a fair way to put it as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who will be joining us in about 15 minutes. Now, I wanted to speak to Colonel Kansian for a long time. He is a very respected veteran and works at a very respected institute, which, I should be transparent, is about a 5-minute walk from where I went to university. So I would attend a lot of seminars, lectures, open public events, and I've listened to Mark quite often. And I have to be honest, I'm surprised by some of what he said. I was surprised. I was observing some of your comments as well. But as an interviewer, as someone who likes to speak to people of professional backgrounds and experience, I'm going to obviously challenge and be respectful in how I do that, even if I am very surprised or disagree. But that's the purpose of this podcast. Is to engage people of dissenting or differing views. Colonel Davis and I have different opinions over NATO or Russia in some ways, but in other ways we might agree. I agree with him that NATO could have done a better job of providing assurances to Russia, but I don't think that's justification what Putin did on February 24th, for example. And the same with Colonel Kantsian right now. I'm surprised by how, I don't even know how to frame it. Some of you were saying chill. I guess I'm surprised by how quietly confident or assured he was about the prospects of a maritime operation securing the Strait of Hormuz. In my opinion, or I think I hold more of an opinion that is shared by most, which is that it would be sort of sitting ducks. Maybe we underestimate the capabilities of the military, the US Navy, Marines, of course. They are incredibly capable. And maybe the colonel is privy to information that I'm not, just being a guy on the internet versus someone who directly works and is involved in the policy circles of Washington. I think the one thing you need to understand is, and I only got it from a very surface level in some ways, but how much of a bubble DC can be. It's a very small city, but wields incredible amounts of power. There's about 800,000 people who live there. And you can wander down the street and you'll be walking behind the former national security advisor or the former director of communications for the Secretary of State, a former CIA analyst. I don't know, just people like that exist across the city. I think I've shared in the past, but I even dated a senior member of Trump's previous administration. I didn't even know that at the time. I wasn't allowed to know. It was only after we broke up that I found out. But the point is that you can run into people of all sorts of backgrounds, and therefore the colonel is likely to be connected to some very important people on the inside who may be able to provide him information about the status of the Navy, or the status of the conflict, the capacity of the United States versus what we're being told in the media. In times of war like this, the fog of war is obviously very pertinent, but also so is the desire to get that information out as quickly as possible, to disseminate it as quickly as possible. I myself am no different. I have to, balance wanting to provide quality whilst also remaining relevant with what's being said in the news. Our meeting, actually, I didn't know the colonel had intended to join me at about 50 minutes ago. I'd said, what about this time, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. UK time? And he put it in his calendar without replying to me saying it. So I was actually taking a break, and then I saw this email. I was like, oh no! So got to jump on the stream again. Otherwise, I would have just kept the previous stream with Vali Nessa going. But anyway, yes, I was surprised, or not expecting some of his positions, but as I say, he may well have more information than I am privy to, and therefore why he's quietly confident. And at the end of the day, as you said, he is a military analyst, a military strategist, not a political one. I'm a geopolitical strategist. It's different. You touch on military analysis, but I'm not a veteran. And so I do not feel comfortable when I'm asked on an interview or on other podcasts, what's my opinion about the military operations of X, Y, and Z? I wouldn't feel comfortable to say intricately about it. I can talk about the strategic objectives because that blends quite a lot often into geopolitical interests, but to specifically talk about a class of frigate or the implications of air supremacy is not my remit. So he is cold and calculated or whatever. Just simply, this is what the situation is, and these are the options that are available to the United States government. It's not our job to make political or normative assessments. It is simply to give the commander-in-chief lay out what options he has and what perhaps are the most recommended and the more or less favorable. So, and I think that's sometimes misunderstood from people who don't come from a military background or have studied military history or something like that. They will listen to, I don't know, for example, in the situation between Israel and Palestine, people will listen to the Israeli comments or the IDF's comments about X, Y, and Z, or people who are analyzing the Israeli operations in Palestine, and they will say that they're completely callous or cold. No, they're just providing a very facts-based, quantitative assessment of the military operation, not whether or not it's legal or right. Those are different arguments and more around the human rights, the normative framing. But given the rate at which the war is going, I personally, I don't share the colonel's confidence. Again, maybe I'm just not informed enough, but I do wonder about the prospect for a naval convoy to traverse the Strait of Hormuz and reach the Persian Gulf all the way up to Karg Island and then secure it. But he has admitted that, you know, casualties would likely be incurred, and that's just the cost of war. That's just what military action involves. Some of you are saying I should promote myself more. So yeah, guys, I mean, I have been on the inside. I have worked in these environments. I'm not just another guy on the internet. Well, I guess I am in some ways, but I have field experience. I have political experience. I've been there. I've been on the corridors of the UN. I've been on the conflict zones of Africa and in Ukraine, not as a veteran, but as a diplomatic mission. I know what it means to see conflict firsthand, sometimes behind the front lines. I know what it really means to see the state of damage done by drones, missiles, the psychological warfare on countries, regardless of where they are in the world. I lived in Africa for 3 years, lived in DC for 5. I mean, yeah, I talk from a position of clarity, I like to think. I have my biases. There's no getting away from that. I'm not pretending to be purely objective. No one is. Anyone who claims to be is bullshitting you and has simply just done a better job of finding ways to manipulate you as people. I approach this very much from I have my preferences, but also this is the reality. I like to interview people of differing viewpoints because, well, why would you want to just reinforce what you already know? Where's the interest in that? You only have one life. Why would you want to not challenge yourself intellectually, normatively, ideologically? And ultimately, because at the end of the day, we hold very little power. I doubt Trump is watching my stream. If he is, well, good job. Good job, Donald. No, but yeah, I would encourage you to subscribe. I'm also too British. I don't like saying subscribe because I think it's sounds desperate or you know, needy. And I'm incredibly awkward. It's like British also asking for money or discussing tips. We don't like to do that. But yeah, do subscribe and ring the notification bell because I do these streams almost daily at this point and will be until the war comes to some kind of conclusion, be that a ceasefire or an actual armistice or peace deal. But we've hosted everyone from General David Petraeus. I think I can publicly state it now, but if you follow the channel, you will know that I host some interesting guests, and someone that I've been waiting to host, and I can confirm he will be joining, is ex-presidential candidate and former NATO Supreme Commander General Wesley Clark. General Wesley Clark is, other than Dwight Eisenhower, who was the first, one of the more known Supreme Commanders of NATO because he oversaw the operations in Kosovo in the 90s, in the Kosovo War, which is obviously a highly contentious and sensitive conflict for the legality around it, and what a lot of people who are anti-NATO argue is an illustration of its aggressive or expansionist tendencies. NATO will argue, and I'm sure Wesley General Clark will argue, is incorrect. It was a defensive operation based on human rights and to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe, which is what the Milosevic, the leader of Serbia at the time, had done in the 90s in the Balkan Wars, and so it was to prevent ethnic cleansing, to prevent genocide. So now that we have a president seemingly threatening genocide against ancient civilization in Iran, I'm looking forward to that conversation, which will be in the next couple of weeks. I will also be joining a very exciting event in New York, likely next week. So if any of you are in the US or have anyone in the United States, New York metropolitan area that you think I should try to set up an in-person interview with, then drop a comment below, and I will see if I can wangle it. I will see if I can work it in. But the point is that we don't just sit in our mum's basement on this channel and talk about it from a reactionary or impulsive perspective. We try to critically analyze and take a step back and compartmentalize or break down properly. A lot of people like to use those phrases like break down or dissect or whatever it is, but we actually do that. And a lot of channels, a lot of creators don't critically analyze. They just offer derogatory remarks, inflammatory commentary, because they're more interested in just getting reactions out of you guys. And whilst I'm interested to get reactions out of you guys and what you think, I'm actually here for genuine debate and discourse. So yeah, I welcome any of your thoughts and suggestions there. But I am, yes, the Srebrenica massacre, which for those of you who aren't aware, Srebrenica was a small settlement just outside of Sarajevo in Bosnia, and estimations vary, but between 8,000 to 12,000, specifically men and boys, were just shot point blank by the forces. I think it was in '95, and I've been to the factory where this was done in Bosnia, and it's one of the most eye-opening and I'm trying to think of the right phrase, but it left an imprint. I found myself being very significantly influenced. It left a formative. It's very formative in how I changed how I looked at things. I was only 22 at the time, I think, and I was in the middle of my undergraduate, or just completed my undergraduate, and was considering what I wanted to do in my life. And I went to this this location, and it left a visible imprinted on my mind. So if any of you are interested in your history in Bosnia and in the Balkan Wars, then I encourage you to visit that site. It's not particularly flashy. It's not like it's really kitted out with lots of "this is where it happened." It's pretty underwhelming, actually. You're just driving through the beautiful green hills, and suddenly there's a factory, and you just stop and you walk in, and suddenly you see in a side room the reality of what people can do. But we are joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who I'm delighted to see again, and let me just add him to the stage. Colonel, hello, how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you? Thanks for having me back.
Yes, it's lovely to have you back. We had a great conversation with another colonel actually earlier, so I'd like to get your takes on similar things to what he was talking about, and then dive into a bit more of what the hell Trump is talking about right now. Actually, no, let's start with that, because I think it's fresh and raw and just insanity. But apparently Trump is implicitly suggesting genocide against civilization in Iran. At least that's how some people, even including some legal experts I've spoken to, interpret it. What do you think?
Well, it's hard to come to any other conclusion. I mean, how else can you say an entire civilization will be destroyed, never to return? I mean, how else can that be interpreted? I mean, there's not a nuance to that. There's not a polite way, I guess, to say that. I mean, it's cut and dried. The only question that it remains is that something he really believes? Is he actually going to try to do that? And then, of course, the first thing I thought of when I saw that, and I was quite shocked, even with what I've known of President Trump for 10 years now, that even surprised me, because I'm thinking from a military perspective, can he do that? What would it take to get that done? And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is nuclear weapons. What else can wipe out an entire civilization, never to return? I mean, even wars. I mean, Nazi Germany was completely wiped out. Japan was completely wiped out, and obviously, they built back from the rubble. But so to say that somebody will be bombed so that they never return, then you have to say, well, are you talking like thermonuclear war where they're literally evaporated? I mean, what are you talking about? Because if the claim is, well, that's just hyperbole, he really means conventional stuff. Well, then you have to say, well, now hang on, because then just be blunt, then he's an idiot, because we've attacked 13,000 targets so far, according to CENTCOM a couple of days ago, in 39 days of war. And it's harmed a bunch of stuff, but it's not knocked them out of power. It's not stopped their missiles. It's not stopped their drones. It's not taken control of the Strait of Hormuz back from them. It's not destroyed their Navy. It's hit a bunch. And so they're continuing able to operate. So after all of that, what are you going to do in one night or 4 hours, as President Trump specified? What weapon systems do we have that we haven't used could cause that kind of damage? And again, you circle back to nuclear weapons. But now I've talked to a bunch of people this afternoon or earlier this morning that have access to the White House, and they confirmed to me that, or rather they tried to assure to me that that's not what he means. But one has to wonder, well, that may not be what you think, and that may be not what some people are saying, but what's in his mind, that's a separate issue here. But there's no question about whatever he means, hyperbole, nuclear, conventional, something version of that, to threaten a country and a civilization. It's not just the country of Iran. It's not just the 47-year Ayatollah regime. You're talking 6,000 years of civilization in this place. How can you say anything other than that's intent to commit a war crime on a scale that even Hitler didn't even try? I mean, Hitler, we talk about him today because of the 6 million Jews that he, destroyed. You're talking a country of 93 million people. I mean, what are you talking about? A civilization. I think it's big time alarming, and I think that there should be some serious consideration of the 25th Amendment. This is not normal speech. This is not just hyperbole. This is evidence of something cognitively wrong.
I made a video about it. I was in Tunisia on a trip I'd planned a while back, and I was meant to be having a lovely Saturday evening with my partner and some friends we'd made, and I was like, I need to make a video. I need to make a response to this. His comments about you crazy bastards and fuck this and fuck that. I do swear, people, I'm European. Just chucking. I've never seen any statement by him before. And even some pretty strong Trump supporters were like, this is uncharacteristic even for him. So I'm curious, how do you interpret his tweet today versus a couple of days ago? Because some people are saying it's even worse.
There's no question it's worse, because at least in the one a couple of days ago, he specified the energy sector and their bridges. We're going to take all that out. And at least you could contort that into, well, those are military targets that he's talking about here. But then to escalate to civilization, I mean, that's so important that he chose that term, clearly not by mistake, clearly not casually, because then he followed it with never to rise again. So that meant that he knew exactly what he was talking about. And then now the vice president today from Hungary seems to reiterate the whole thing and seems to be supportive of it. I was actually thought when they showed him leaving on the 6th, the day before this deadline came, and he's been reported to be the one guy who's really been pushing back, and somebody that I know who's got some pretty high level contacts in his office just told me a few days ago that during a lot of this stuff, he's been in just depression about what's going on, because this is so opposite what he wanted. But then yet here he is on camera today, just hours ago, reiterating what President Trump said. Yep, they either make a deal or we're going to use some weapons that we've never used before, and we're going to take care of that problem. So whatever he may be saying privately, that's what he's saying publicly, and that's the only thing we can go by. But either way you want to look at it, this is a really alarming situation. I don't know what's going to happen tonight.
Do you think that it's just a case of he tacos? He backs out, he walks back. There's a clarification that he meant just the bridges. It's a massive underwhelming attack. Like, what
Well, that's the risk. I mean, I hope so. I certainly hope he tacos out. I mean, because anything less than that could be really catastrophic. Because and there's already, even today, before the sun goes down, there's already been a number of attacks on a number of bridges and a number of energy infrastructure. So already we're tempting the IRGC to make good on their threat, which is if those targets were hit, then they're going to start attacking the same caliber of targets throughout the GCC. And apparently, if it's really big, they said they may even go outside of the region, which I interpret to mean maybe some of our bases in Germany or Italy, where a lot of this the processors going on, or maybe even in RAF, Fairfield, I think it is, Fairford in UK. I don't know what they may do. I don't know if they can reach those targets or not, but they specifically said they would even go outside the region. So now then, if he, quote, tacos out and doesn't do anything besides just some more bombs and maybe just hit some other targets, then you have the Iranians. There's a consequence to that this time, because in the Iranians are going, wait, that's it? You made this big, bold declaration and, civilization and all that, and this is all you do? The same stuff that you've been doing the previous 39 days? Pfft, you're nothing, man. We can do it. And then that might give them even more incentive to say, we're going to start amping this up. We're going to raise the boat stakes this time. We're going to now start hitting these same targets in these GCC countries that you threatened to do with us. We're going to do them to them. And what are you going to do in return? You don't want to give confidence and make your opponent cocky and start to take more risks than they might have taken before. And so any idea that this is going to cause them to back down is just already been shattered, because, I mean, all it's done is made their country, not just their leaders, but their individual people go into all these bridges and some of these nuclear facilities and saying, yet daring the United States to attack and even kill regular people. I mean, they're not backing down at all. It's making them even more firmly around the regime than they were before.
But that's where I very much agree with you, because people who I think, and this is what I said in this reactionary video, I just dumped a bunch of thoughts on the internet, and basically, like, this is not master negotiation. It is not some super secret grand strategy. It is the reaction of a man who is getting angry because he's not getting what he wants. And with someone as big an ego as he has, I mean, I'll put it as a question to you simply: how far could this go? Are we talking about him literally thinking of a tactical nuclear weapon?
I mean, honestly, how can you not suggest that he'll think that? Because he has shown there are no norms that he won't blow through. I mean, look, you can make an argument that this started with the 12-day war, the so-called 12-day war and Operation Midnight Hammer last year. And then that escalated, and we started now just choosing to unilaterally attack speedboats in the Caribbean and Pacific waters and just claim that they were doing drugs, and then saying, well, I know that there's no law on the planet that allows you to just summarily execute people, but we're going to kill everyone in a boat. No one did anything. And then he escalated that to seize the sitting president of another country by merely declaring that I don't think he was legally elected, so I'm just going to take him, kill 100 or so people in the process, and now I'm going to permanently take control of their oil, and I'll kill anybody else if they don't play ball with me. No one did anything. The guardrails of the U.S. law obliterated. The guardrails of the U.S. Constitution, the separation of powers between the legislative and the executive branch, knocked out completely. They are black and white. Only Congress can declare war. And then the president, commander-in-chief, can only exercise that authority if it's been authorized by the Congress. No question about it. Congress is as much to blame with this as the president is, because they laid down and gave him this power, even voting themselves out of the equation, both the House and the Senate here recently. And so now then here you have an all-out, full-scale war to everything that can be imagined to it. Nobody is trying to hold him accountable. Nobody's trying to hold him to law. And he literally does whatever he wants. Now, if he's willing to do all of this, to include just summarily ordering people's deaths in speedboats, killing a bunch of people in Venezuela, having now a second war against Iran, who knows how many people are going to die from that, why would he then suddenly say, but I won't go this far? Especially, you talk about his ego, if he starts losing and if the Iranian side starts amping it up and saying, now then we're feeling a little bit frisky and we're going to start calling some of the shots here because we've weathered the best of what you've got and we're not going to submit or capitulate. So now then we're going to start demanding some terms of our own. And here's some of the calling cards we're going to start putting down. Trump, I don't think his brain even knows how to submit, how to admit defeat, how to say, all right, we can't do this. And Taco it's not going to work anymore, because now then they are in physical control of the Strait of Hormuz and all the oil that goes out through it. And he can't take that out of their hands. And now he would go on and have done all this stuff, lost these troops, lost all these combat aircraft. And at the end of the day, they're in a more powerful position, despite all of the death and destruction they have suffered. They're in a more powerful position now than when they started. I can't see him just saying, dang it, the snap, I shouldn't have done that, but well, live to fight another day. All right, let's look to the midterms here. I think that the risk that he would say, all right, we'll just use a little nuclear weapon, because here's a line of reasoning that you can see happening in the inner circle, because he is advised by some of the worst people that you can imagine on matters of war and peace and diplomacy that are not qualified in any way, shape, or form to do their jobs. But that's who he's listening to. I have it on good authority that he will literally block out people who have sane and rational and logical commentary and advice to give him. Now then they can say, listen, Mr. President, we've been here before. The only way we can solve this now is a ground force and a whole army, just like we did in Iraqi Freedom 2003 or Desert Storm in 1991. That's what it's going to take. And it's going to be a bigger army, because it's bigger than Iraq was. So maybe 500,000, 600,000, 700,000, all is the entire force we have. Plus we're going to need allies. We'll suffer hundreds of thousands of casualties, quite probably many, many killed in combat just because of the defensive capabilities. Or we can do what President Truman did when facing a similar circumstances, where if we did the island hopping all the way to Tokyo, we would end up losing, according to one study at the time, said 1 million troops doing this. Or we can use a tactical nuclear weapon until they finally get it. And we'll drop one, and if they don't surrender, we'll drop a second one, and then we'll keep offering until finally they come to their senses and drop it. And then that gives him what he wanted, which is a submission and a capitulation and the ownership of his oil. You can see that logic would resonate well in President Trump's mind. Someone who is devoid of morality, he's, by his own statement, said, I am a moral code unto myself. I pay attention to what I think and what I feel. He didn't even pretend to say the Bible, even though he tries to put all these trappings of being a Christian and having all these Christian leaders, which, as a follower of Christ, that's something that just I find very angering, that these people give that impression of the imprimatur of their cloak and everything else to make people think that he's actually a Christian, when by his own mouth, he's never even read the Bible, and he has his own moral code. And we see that code doesn't even care about people getting killed. So why would we think he won't go to that step and order something like that with that kind of logic? And I guarantee you there's people inside the White House that will be pitching that idea.
Very well said. I'm Russian Orthodox. I don't practice necessarily committedly, but nothing that he says or behaves like in any way, I think, would be someone who pretends to even remotely, respect the church and Christ, right, and anything like that. I find him the most vulgar, and I've always tried to hold out a little bit and have a sort of a sense of, as a host, as someone who tries to remain, well, I have my biases, but recognize my biases whilst then trying to be objective. I try to rationalize that Trump does have a deeper thinking behind him, or maybe his team does, or maybe there's a longer term. That just isn't. The guy is a grandiose narcissist with an inferiority complex, who is easily manipulatable and influenced by exterior parties like Putin or others who would like to get what they want more.
Or Benjamin Netanyahu, don't mention that one.
On Netanyahu, indeed. I was just coming to that. Absolutely, Colonel. So I guess what I want to know from you is, how would a implication of the 25th Amendment actually work? What restrictions, what checks and balances are there to limit what Trump can say and do in these circumstances?
Yeah, it's a really complicated situation. It's not an easy answer, because if you get the 25th Amendment and you get the cabinet to get together, which of course he specifically hand selected every individual because of their loyalty to ensure that this doesn't ever happen. And in a normal circumstances, it wouldn't, because of that point. But in something like this, it's no longer inconceivable, especially if he ever makes good on it. I think that it is conceivable that nobody is going to want to be on the wrong side of history on this one by defending that kind of thing. But here's the problem: even if it works, and I'm not an expert on the process, but I think that it would then have to go to a vote in the House and the Senate, and then oddly enough, he would have some limited sort of a veto capability where he could say no, and then the Congress, with both the House and the Senate, would have to vote again, and it would so it would take it's a long process. It's not something that would just be a vote of the cabinet members, unfortunately, or we would have a better shot at something. So even if they did that, then they would expose, every one of them would be exposing themselves as being disloyal, and now then they're going to be completely shut out of his inner circle while he continues to fight in these other rounds, and he'll still be fully vested in the powers of the president, and then it gets even more dangerous. So it's not an easy solution, because that could actually fill him with even more fear and make him act in more desperate ways. So even that's not a clear idea. But I mean, maybe just the thought of a 25th Amendment or something, even despite from his opinions, whatever, that could cause people to, the feeble power could rise up and ask, can make him leave, make him walk away, like LBJ did, like Nixon did, maybe something like that. You never know, but it's a real dangerous time to be an American, I'll just tell you.
Well, I'm meant to be coming to New York next week. This is good. I don't know if you're not based in New York. I would say we could grab a what's the word? A countdown cocktail right before we be both. Also,
I'm in DC if you get down that direction. But.
You are in DC. Oh well, then maybe I'll make a trip down. We could do something together. I lived in DC for about 6 years almost. Okay, so no, I was in the bubble. I was in the swamp for a few years, studying and learning how it works. But I guess what I'm really interested is for your thoughts on what would it look like. Let's assume that the nuclear option is not that, but what we're going to see committed on the ground for Karg Island, or is it going to be the Hormuz Strait? What do you think Trump is planning, or just taking out a bunch of bridges and stuff?
I think that there's enough evidence out there to suggest that it is likely, and I can't say guaranteed, but I think that it is likely that this whole episode with the shoot down of the F-15 and the 2 pilots that were extracted, and all this, especially the operation on the second one, I think that was part of a raid that was planned on either Natanz or Isfahan. I think one of those two, because they're kind of close together. And I think that it went bad, and they got the guy shot down. Now they're trying to rescue him because there's no scenario to where you're going to send in a couple of C-130 type aircrafts to try and get one guy out with hundreds of people on the ground. That doesn't make any sense at all. You want to go in with the smallest footprint you can to get him out as quickly as you can. It makes a lot of sense to have a lot of air power around it to vector anybody and make sure there's no air defense or get any ground attack while you go bring a helicopter in and clear out a passage. All that makes sense. But having these 2 C-130s and then the 4 little birds, that sounds like a raid to me. That's the equipment that you would use for a raid. And since it happened right in the shadow, basically, of Isfahan and Natanz, I think that's probably what it was. I've talked to some people who have some contacts in the region, and they say that as best they can without getting in trouble with classified, implicate that is the case. But now that it's probably been either postponed or canceled because the cat's out of the bag on that. But then what else would you do? Would you do Karg? Would you do one of these Kashim Islands? Some of these others, about a dozen different potential strike points, maybe even more than that. What are you going to accomplish with that? I mean, just having an island, having a season, a spot does nothing to keep the strait open. All it does is get you more casualties and makes it easier for the Iranians to shoot at Americans. I mean, they would almost be prisoners of a certain degree or hostages that they would use, and all the media would focus on that, and all you would end up doing is losing it. And then what else does that leave? More of the regular bombing? I mean, look, the Washington Post, Axios, a bunch of people have been very open about reporting that we're running very low on JASSM's standoff weapons. We're running even lower on Tomahawk cruise missiles. May only have a few hundred left in the inventory I'm talking about. So you can't fight a sustained war. You can't just do more of the same or do it heavier, because that's obviously not going to cause any effect. That we would have already done that. Yeah, you can hit a bunch of energy, but I mean, look at the energy war between Russia and Ukraine. They've been slugging it out like a heavyweights for years now, and you can knock some stuff out, then it gets repaired, and they'll knock it out again, and they'll repair. I mean, whether electricity, power substations, the reprocessing facilities, I mean, all kinds of stuff. Everything can be repaired. So it's not like you hit it once and it's off the table for the rest of the time. So that's not going to cause the regime to fall at all. They'll simply repair it as best they can, like the Ukraine side has done. And then what? So what are you going to do if after making all these grandiose statements and you're going to get all this stuff, or you're going to bring holy hell down and all that, and then all you do is bring more of the same that they can, endure under? Then you look weak, and then now that you're running out of missiles, you're running out of interceptor missiles. You see what I'm saying? We can't just keep doing this for a long time. This isn't like the Russia-Ukraine situation where they have bought now into the 5th year. God only knows how long that's going to go, because there's been enough ammunition on both sides in the offensive and the defensive categories to keep things going. As of course, you have a ground component, which we don't have. All we have is air. And so once you run out a lot of these air interceptors, what are you going to do? See, those are the things that I'm thinking about here, besides what's happening on the ground or what's going to happen at 8 p.m. tonight. How are you going to sustain this over even a number of, like, 1 or 2 more months? We may run out of these key weapon systems and ammunition stockpiles in a mere weeks. And then what are you going to do? You're going to have to go to older stuff. Maybe the interceptors now, instead of Pack 3, we're going to go back down to Pack 2, or some of these other things that are even less capable. And so that means even more of the Iranian stuff is going to get through if they just keep using what they have. And of course, their claim is that they have been using their older stuff from 2012 to 2018 or something like that, and that all of their newest technology has been waiting for the moment when we run out of the Pack 3s, and then it's just everything is going to get through. Remains to be seen if that's true or just something they're saying. But even if it's just the same stuff, and Shahed 136s or just these ballistic missiles they've been shooting, if you don't have Pack 3s at all, I mean, stuff's going to get through. So we're in a pretty bad shape here, and Trump has to do something. And I'm sure that behind the scenes, they're probably telling him all this stuff. He probably gets the classified actual numbers. At least I hope he does. So that makes him somewhat willing to take more risk and a little bit more of a desperate situation than may appear, because on the paper, on the spreadsheet, America's way up here, Iran's way down here. We're the best, most amazing military in the history of the world and all this kind of stuff. And if you run out of missiles here in just a matter of weeks, I mean, that's going to leave you. Not only is that going to expose you as not being this great power, but it's also going to mean, what about Europe? What about Asia? What about any threats we have globally? Now we've got nada. We got nothing, man. We can't defend ourselves. We can't go on the offense. And I assure you, Russia has a substantial stockpile of all these categories, because they've only been using a small portion of what they produce on that battlefield. And China certainly has learned this lesson long ago. And by all accounts, they're even have a greater engineering capacity than the Russians do. So, I mean, not saying that they're looking to get to a war with the United States, because nuclear weapons still exist. So they wouldn't be doing something like that. But this puts our conventional forces at profound risk already, no matter how this comes out, because of what we've done by myopically focusing on the ground right here. We have just frittered away our resources that we might need anywhere else in the world.
I was on mute. There you go. No, I mean, on that point, there's been a notable amount of reallocation of assets from Asia. And this is why I largely reject this whole notion that this is part of some broader grand strategy vis-a-vis China, right? Trump wants to remove Venezuela, Iran, and then, weakens China's oil supplies and energy security and stuff like that in some grandiose war with the Chinese.
Well, now I'll tell you, he may want to do all that stuff, but we don't have the means to pull it off. And now in the attempt, because I'm not ruling out that may not have been the attempt or the intent by some in the administration, and maybe convincing Trump of it. But man, if you fail in your opportunity here, I promise you that Venezuela will dry up in a heartbeat the minute that they don't feel a threat from the United States. And if we also, lose all this stuff here, and then our allies start losing the ability to produce, we're going to be in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of speculation, would China move on Taiwan, whether, if the Americans really did enter some kind of quagmire over Kyrgyz Island or trying to securitize the Strait of Hormuz. not sure if the PLA is ready to move on Taiwan personally, but what's your assessment, therefore, of a potential operation? This is where I want to get your take compared to our previous guest, Mark Kansian of CSIS. I'm sure you're familiar with that organization. Yeah. And he was surprisingly relatively calm and collected about it, emphasizing that, casualties are a consequence of war. And even if the US faced some difficulty, shall we put it, in traversing the Strait of Hormuz and then through the Persian Gulf up to Karg Island, in essence, though, they would be able to take and hold Karg Island because of the situation with the Iranians and their stockpiles being damaged or something. I to be honest, I was surprised by his relative calm, and I do think that the Iranians have more potency, but I don't know. I mean, what's your assessment based on people you've spoken to?
First of all, just a real quick comment about the China-Taiwan situation. I think that there is less likelihood that China will move militarily on Taiwan now, because Taiwan realizes that the United States is not coming to their rescue. And that's going to moderate what their rhetoric is about independence and whatnot. And they see, man, there's not even a fantasy of a hope that we can militarily hold out against China should they attack. So I think that they're going to be a lot more amenable to cooperating and to getting along with China, which is probably good for everybody on the island. The idea that we were going to come and save them, I've written on this for many years, that even without all this stuff, we would have gotten our ass handed to us and we probably would have failed. I mean, almost certain. But now then, I think it's pretty clear that Taiwan by itself couldn't defend against it. So I don't think it'll come to that. And
if I can just on that point, the Taiwanese have had a bill that the Americans, I think there was some Congress people, there was a delegation who went down to Taipei about a month ago trying to get them to push it through, because Trump was getting frustrated with the lack of progress on this defense bill, because he basically saw Taiwan as wanting to free ride off the US again. But also the opposition leader of Taiwan is in Beijing today having a meeting with Xi Jinping. So I think you might have some truth to what you're saying. But anyway, I wanted to hear what your thoughts are on Hormuz and all that.
Sure. Now, back to Karg. Couldn't disagree with more with Colonel Kansian. I know who he is. He's got a good reputation enough. We agree on many things. Definitely not on this one, though, because you take a look at, number one, how are you going to get there? You're going to get there with tilt rotors? I mean, we just lost a bunch of aircraft. We've had lots of helicopters blown up. Are you going to send the USS Tripoli with its battle group, or the Boxer with its battle group through the Strait of Hormuz, up what I call the gauntlet of death, all the way through the Gulf of Oman and all those hundreds of miles of Iranian shoreline? I mean, even artillery, for crying out loud. You get on Karg, I mean, where are you going to hide? Where are you going to get protected? Even if you get on there, whether it's tilt rotor or something else, say somehow you magically make it through the strait and the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf, and you get through all of that 800 or so miles of navigable waters, and then you somehow get guys on there. Then what? What have you got? Because you can't sustain that, because now then you've got to. I mean, I was in logistics because I was the second in command of an armored cab squadron in Germany for a period of time. I served in Afghanistan on 2 separate cases, and especially the last one was I was at Bagram Air Base, where a lot of the logistics for the entire theater were done, and I was a part of observing and in some cases participating in some of the logistic trails, and I saw how hard it was to keep a lot of these distant outposts and combat operation bases, the COBs, supplied. And that's on a land place where I can control the airspace above it and can have some, at least on the route, on it. But when you're talking something like this, it's on open water, whether it's by air or by sea, either one, there's nowhere to hide for even your resources. Every time you fly something in there, you have a chance of getting it shot down, in and out. The guys on the ground there, especially Karg, gets within artillery range of the shore. So you can just get standard artillery. They can just pound you with that kind of stuff for a long time. Then, of course, all different categories of drones. I've already seen some reports that a lot of these FPV drones from the Russia-Ukraine war have there. Some of the spooled, the fiber optic drones have made some appearances, probably more would if something like that happened. And then, of course, all the classes of missiles that go along with it. All of that would be focused on this to just pummel us. And so I don't know what anybody's thinking that would be a good idea or an attainable military objective. And if you did, then what? What have you gained by taking and then holding Karg Island? You want to take some of the Iranian oil off the market? I mean, we don't need to take Karg Island to do that. We can just keep it from going out through the Gulf of Oman. We got full control over that stuff there. But we've taken sanctions off of Iran so that they will send out oil. And now they've done it more than they did before because we need that oil on the market to keep the oil price from going above, I think it's like 114 or something when I looked earlier today, to make sure it doesn't go up to 125, 150 and higher possibly. So if you take Karg Island and stop that oil, then you've sent the price up and you haven't accomplished anything on the ground except built-in longer-term disruptions. So, strategically, economically, that's a losing proposition. So I don't think that that's a target because there's nothing to gain in a very high cost to even make the attempt. But what does make any sense on the ground? No, I don't see anything that makes any sense whatsoever on the ground. I think we've got a total of like 10,000 ground troops potentially to choose from for a lot of these missions. That's a dot on the map, man. Iran has regular forces around 1 million or so, but now according to Pezeshkian, they've got mobilization and people have volunteered or whatever, and it's around 14 million. Let's assume that he's exaggerating. Let's say it's only 4 or 5 million. I mean, in this country that's this big, they can mass those troops anywhere that they need to, should they need to get into a ground fight or something. But it's going to mainly be artillery, drones, and missiles anyway, no matter what the men are. But you just can't do something with 20,000 guys. I don't know what anybody's thinking.
Well, let's continue this train of thought, because one of the other scenarios, because Colonel Kansian they do a lot of war gaming, a lot of war scenario, war planning in CSAS, and he gave me 3 different scenarios. 2 of them similar, but the one that I'm particularly curious for your thoughts, reaction to, is Kuwait. So he suggested that Kuwait could be used as effectively a staging ground to launch maritime vessels of some form with Marines from the northwest down towards Karg Island. Now, my counter response to that was, doesn't that make Kuwait more of a target for Iran because they're more actively involved? But he said, well, they effectively are anyway because of the US assets there. Yes, and I mean, I suppose they have been targeted already, but they would be they would be complicit. They wouldn't just be a passive observer or recipient, right? So for me, it does change the international law, IHL around it, right? Humanitarian law around it. What's your reaction to that? Because that was not a scenario I had imagined.
I have contemplated that, but number one, unless the ship's already there, you're not going to be able to use it. And what ships do we have there that can, I'm sure you can find any kind of vessels. I'm sure there are plenty that can navigate the water, but are they combat ships? I mean, I don't think that we have a Tripoli type aircraft carrier, that we use to do that, or the Boxer, or any other kind of naval vessels that are going to do anything, that are going to accomplish that objective. And then you still got the same issue that you have with the Boxer coming up through the Gulf. You still have to navigate the water, and they're going to be looking for that kind of thing. Secondly, look at Bahrain. Look at our naval station in Bahrain. How effective were we in holding that? We didn't. In fact, they've had all kinds of facilities hit. The second that any information comes out, and of course, that the Russians and the Chinese, not to mention their own drone capabilities, are going to be scouring all this stuff, and they're going to be looking at everything that's going on. And the second that anybody recognizes there's a buildup of naval capacity there, just even assembling and people getting on board, and long before they get on the war, that's going to be known. And here's going to be some drones, missiles, Shahed 136s in the ports, or they'll start hitting the ports. I mean, they hit Jubal today with some of the petrochemical stores. Well, all they got to do is change the targeting grid, and then they'll move it over to the port and hit some of the ships, et cetera. So to me, that doesn't solve anything. And that's a close target. That's actually a lot easier for Iran to hit. So I don't think that solves your problem.
I mean, to your point, I just to stay on Karg Island for a second, and then I want to shift to the Hormuz a little bit. But on Karg Island, the argument is that by taking it, you can destroy 90% of Iran's production facility. But from my understanding, Iran has other facilities on other islands, other outlets dotted around the southern part of the Persian Gulf. So it doesn't seem to really solve the issue, and therefore, longer term, you have to sort of securitize, manage the whole of the Persian Gulf, the whole of the Strait of Hormuz? Like, how many troops do you need for that? How many naval assets do you need for that? What kind of air power do you need for that? Can you take us through war?
So if I just wanted to take the oil or take it offline, you don't need to put one troop on Karg. You just send a few missiles over and take good care of that. That wouldn't be hard at all. We've got plenty of ordnance that can take that out in a minute. So if you just want to take it offline, we could do that by in an hour. But the point being, that circles back to what I said a second ago. We're trying to get more oil out so that we keep the quantity on the international market up to keep the price manageable. So that's going to harm us, because that's now long-term issues. But to your point, yeah, there are alternatives for Iran. They're not as good as that. You can't get the volume out. So it would definitely have a significant curtailment on their ability to get money. But right now, that's not really the big issue, because they're making money hand over fist at the moment compared to where they were before. But that's not their problem right now. That's useful, but it's not, doesn't help with the war effort, because that's not going to stop a bomb from falling or rebuild something that's broken now. So that would harm us more than it would harm Iran. So I doubt that's going to be the case.
Colonel Kurzin talked about the fact that to manage all of this, you would effectively need to have a large-scale convoy, naval convoy, coming up through the Strait of Hormuz. And as part of any conflict, casualties are inevitable. Now, obviously, to some people, that sounds incredibly difficult to hear, but he's a military analyst, a veteran, and therefore he's looking at it from the cold, calculated element of what war entails. From your perspective, though, do you think that there is a way we could try to do this without casualties, or it's impossible and we should just be forgetting it? And if Trump wants to gain leverage over Iran, he should be looking elsewhere.
No, it's impossible. I mean, there's no chance on God's earth that you're going to have a naval convoy roll up, first of all, within range of the Iranian shoreline in the Gulf of Oman, then go through the tiny strait, because it's a very narrow band where you can navigate those level of ships, and then go all the way up through the Persian Gulf. There's no chance. I mean, look, I don't know if you've seen any of the images, not just the maps, but the images of what that strait looks like, and what some of the sheer mountainsides that go up and the cliffs and everything. I mean, it's very, very daunting, very easy for defensive folks to hide inside there. There's probably any number of impossible to find caves or places where even in the water, below the waterline, where you can see, but there's underwater entrances and exits. And so there's still, I think I've heard, like 19 submarines, midget subs, and some of the other things, that none of which have been taken out, and they're all in there. What are you going to do about those, especially when you get into the strait? Or they're underwater, what they call missiles or navigable torpedoes, or drone, underwater drones. They're on the ground, on the surface drones, all of which, or thousands of which, are allegedly in a lot of these underground bunkers spread throughout that whole area. And then we get back again to the artillery issue, because you can just sit up in a lot of these places. You can use mortars, you can use just regular tube artillery. And then there's the drones and everything else that you can, from a protected position, be able to engage. And it's really hard to even find and then to retaliate. And it would be a never-ending shooting gallery. How does that help anybody? I mean, how many of these convoys back and forth are you going to get? You can lose one ship at a time. How many ships are you going to sacrifice to not have the straits open up? It's just militarily unworkable and logistically infeasible.
But isn't it the case that we have air superiority, air supremacy, and therefore U.S. naval aerial assets can help to intercept potential strikes on the Navy?
Sure, they can. I mean, we definitely have air superiority, but we don't have air supremacy, as we just found out to our pain that the Iranians are able to knock down F-15s, F-16s, A-10s, F-35s, and of course every caliber of helicopter, and the C-130 caliber. The MHC-130, I think it's called. Obviously, they can take down anything. So how many of those are you going to get into? Are you going to say, well, 95% of our aircraft get through? Okay, you've seen what 5% looks like on the ground in wreckage. How many months of that are you going to go to just keep peeling away? Every few days, you're going to lose more aircraft. You see, that math doesn't work over a period of time. But the Iranian side will continue to fight it because it's an existential threat for them. So it's just unworkable, because it doesn't solve the problem of getting the Iranian side out of their defensive zones. And of course, that goes back hundreds of miles off the coast, and with some of the missiles that are in there. That once you get one part solved, then you got to have another one. It's just a never-ending, just slow bleed for no reason to think you're going to gain anything.
No, and in the absolute chaos of what we're seeing today, Trump's tweets and the build up to the timeline deadline is the fact that we did have an F-15 go down. So yes, you're right. We're going back to air superiority. Excuse me. But like, what does that expose? Just your quick take on that. What does the downing of a jet like that, the workhorse, as I believe it's known in the US, what does that tell us about the state of US operations and capabilities, or what we don't know about Iran's, perhaps?
Yeah, and by the way, if I've only got about 5 or 6 minutes left, I'm going to have to bug out. This tells you that we have significant capacity, and we are prioritized and optimized to do short, sharp operations. In, out, we can bring immense amount of firepower, both naval and air, to bear in a short period of time, and then we get out. I mean, that's what we're optimized for. What we are not built for is any kind of a sustained operation, because it's not even a matter of the ships per se or the airframes per se. It's a matter of the ordnance that goes in them. And as I mentioned, we're already in a dangerously, like in the red area of our inventories on JASSMs and the Tomahawks, and quite possibly also in the PAC-3. So some analysis I've seen, which are pretty convincing, is that that's also in the red or in the black, meaning we're running remarkably short on those. So you can't get into a long war. So we got great airframes, terrific. We got incredibly trained pilots, fantastic. But if you don't have ordnance to shoot at them, and the other side can just absorb them because of the terrain, their defensibility, and their sheer size, then you can't win a war of attrition. I mean, that's why the Russia-Ukraine war has gone on as long as it is, because it's a war of attrition, and Russia appears content to say, hey, we've got the resources here and the time, and we're just going to slowly grind Ukraine to dust, even if it takes multiple years. And they can do that. The Ukraine side can't survive that. The math and time is working against them here, but they have just performed magnificently to be able to maintain this stability they have for this long. But there's an exit date on that. There's an expiration date, I'm sorry. And our situation is worse because at least the Ukraine side had all of the Western Europe and all of their combined capabilities, and the inventories that existed in 2022 have all been dwindling down, but they had a lot to give, especially in the beginning. Now they don't. So that's obviously a problem also for Ukraine. That has a ramification for them for all of this. But ours, because we gave away so much stuff to Ukraine, you gave away so much stuff to Israel since 2023. Now then that we're using it at a very high rate, our industrial capacity is basically for peacetime. And so it's not designed to be able to have a war of attrition. That's where it all gets down to. That's why we can't do a war of attrition. We don't have the ammunition or the defense industrial base stockpiles capacity to withstand one like Russia and China do.
Interesting. And I think proximity also is important, right? Russia and Ukraine, it's right on their borders. The entirety, the US has to deliver all of this across the entirety of the road. And whilst you can have bases, it's still not enough to offset what could be from the home. But my last question before you you move on to your next engagement, Colonel, is simply, what do you think the deadline means? Where do you think we go from here? Are we going to see an off-ramp? Are we going to see de-escalation, or it's just going to go up and up?
I have serious, grave concerns that President Trump is going to make good on his threat tonight, hopefully, with conventional means. He's not going to go to the nuclear weapon, at least not early. And he's going to start hitting these categories of things that he's talking about: the electricity grids, their oil infrastructure, and bridges, and all that kind of thing. I fear that he's going to make good on it. And I think that the IRGC has already got their targets pre-planned. And the minute that those things start falling, whatever number that they've calculated is their red line, and they're just going to give the order to strike. And then you're going to have Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE. They're just going to have a lot of their infrastructure just devastated. And if Iran does what they have sometimes said, and they go after these desalination plants, I mean, you're talking about a literal existential threat to the survival of the people in some of these countries, especially like Saudi Arabia. My gut tells me that Iran won't do that because they don't want to have a catastrophe on their hand. But I think that they will go after their economic infrastructure. And the IRGC this morning said that they would also not limit themselves if Trump crosses some red line that they decide inside, that they won't even keep it in the region, which I interpret as being maybe in Europe or some of our bases that are in extended places even outside of the region. I don't know that they would do that. I fear that they do, because then you have the real prospect of expanding this to an even greater area. And so that's going to have long-term consequences, no matter what happens in the short term, once you start hitting those facilities, because many of them, and I mean, like the Pars gas field already is going to take like multiple years to get fully back online as it is, because of the damage already done. And if you start now adding to that list, I mean, there's going to be some real problems. And so the supply shortfall, it's not even going to matter so much who has control of the strait at that point, because the production itself has been now not permanently, but severely damaged for an extended period of time. And, I worry about what's going to happen to the global economy. And again, I circle back around to our defense industrial base is not designed to sustain a long-term engagement. So we can't fight a war of attrition and win. And it seems that the Iranian side has prepared for this and does have a lot of storage underneath and can certainly go longer than we can, I think. And so this could be really bad for us.
Yeah, no, I hasten to add that it will not go somewhere that exactly great. But Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for rejoining the show. I look forward to having you back very soon. We're going to continue on for a short while, but be sure to check out Daniel's work as well. And let's hope that it doesn't go the way and we can be talking in more favorable circumstances.
Love to do that. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot then. Well, everyone, that was Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. As I said, we're going to stay on for a short while, sort of maybe debrief, react to some of the Colonel's thoughts. I'm more inclined to share his concerns than Colonel Kansian's calmness. I worry about the longevity of this war. I worry about the unintended consequences. I worry about the reaction time, Ollie. I worry about Trump is in over his head. He is out of his depth. And whether or not you're a military analyst and you can make the cold, calculated, objective analysis, you don't make the decision. Trump makes the decision, and he is not objective and he is not critical. He's critically insane, I think, perhaps. But but jokes aside, I think he is. It's not only about the objective analysis done from a military standpoint. It's about how Trump interprets it. And his interpretation is the problem, because he is not acting in a cold, calculated manner. He is reacting in a clearly agitated, even if it's not crazy, but like he is emotionally charged. He is angry or whatever, impulsive, in that he's not getting his way. So even if he gets the best possible analysis from the world's best military leaders and experts, he himself makes the final decision, and he himself mentally inside is not in the best place, should not be the one with the final decision. I'm not going to go into whether or not, the Iranians are more in a better position or not. I don't think anyone's winning in this situation. What I do think is that the Iranians are better at the chess game. I think they have thought a few moves ahead. And I think that if Trump follows through with this deadline where he takes out these sites, let's go with the minimal, the minimal would be him declaring sort of ceasefire or something, but let's go with the most supported interpretational scenario, which is that he targets these bridges, these energy infrastructures. The Iranians would have scenarioed that. They would have wargamed that. And they're going to be like, okay, well, then we'll take out, they're going to do what they've threatened to do. The Iranians are the one thing that you can recognize, maybe not respect, but you can recognize from the Iranian perspective, is that they follow through on what they say. or that they react in proportionality. In international law, you have a few principles. One of them is the principle of proportionality, that in international humanitarian law of war, you respond in proportion to what your opponent does, or in principle, you're supposed to do that. The other one is precaution. So the Iranians will argue that they are acting in precaution, right? Like the Israelis have occupied southern Lebanon in a preemptive defense, or they decided to take out Iran's infrastructure on February 28th as a preemptive deterrence because they thought that the Iranians were planning something, which I think is bullshit. But that was the claim. So they preemptively, along with the United States, launched these strikes. And so Tehran responded in proportion with strikes across other sites, and then upped that set of strikes across the whole of the Middle East, or large proportions of the Middle East, once it became publicly known that Ayatollah Khamenei had been killed. In this regard, if Trump does decide to take out any and all bridges, any and all infrastructure, civilian or not, that is a free-for-all. That gives the Iranians legal justification, at least in principle, to do the same. Anywhere that wields a US base or US, that makes it, that's fine in their regard. I'm not saying I agree with it, but if Trump's going to do this, then he's moving the goalposts. He's moving the framing of the conflict. Now, no longer is it just military assets, but it's basically whatever takes your fancy. And Trump's comments, which, again, you know, they could be part of some insane negotiating strategy or some insane smoke and mirrors, which, as I think, is just complete bullshit. You know, let's assume that they're not, and more of he's just losing it because he's not getting what he wants, or things aren't going the way he was expecting. He's completely showing his hand, or he's completely coming off like a complete loose cannon. And the Iranians, they don't have to say anything at all. They just have to remain, well, they just have to do. They don't have to say anything. They just have to react. You know, like China. China doesn't do anything, really. It doesn't have to, but it's winning people left, right, and center because of Trump's self-destructive actions. So the Chinese approach of non-interference is certainly more appealing, even if it's not ideal because it welcomes democratic backsliding or anti-democratic values or whatever, right? That's a slightly different point, but the principle is the same, that China doesn't have to do anything to come out of this much more beneficial than America. It's destroying alliances, destroying America's global reputation, destroying, weakening its military stockpiles and assets, as Daniel Davis said. China's just sitting there like, okay. Obviously, China's not immune from all this, but I think you get my point. So by overplaying his hand or overextending, overreaching, Trump is just exposing America, I think, in a much worse position. And that's why I'm more inclined to agree or lean towards what Colonel Davis has said versus what Colonel Kansian has said. Now, there may be information that, again, I'm not privy to. I'm trying to sort of, you know, if America literally put all its assets in the Middle East and completely committed to some large, elongated military campaign, then yeah, it could probably do whatever it wanted. You know, people say that America's not as powerful as it is. Well, yeah, because we haven't seen America in a all-out conventional conflict since the Second World War or Vietnam. But even then, those are not technical. Well, no, okay, Afghanistan, but like on Iraq. But like, my point is that if you're talking about a conventional military warfare of two conventional militaries fighting one another without guerrilla tactics or asymmetrical means, then yeah, America should be, in theory, able to overwhelm any opposing force. But modern warfare is not fought like that. And it's very decentralized. It's very asymmetric. It's very ebbs and flows. It's not like a continuous wave of energy, as we've seen in the war in Ukraine. You have phases where it's just nothing's happening, and then you have some degree of activity, but even then it's not much. And quickly both sides dig in. So in this regard, unless you're going to see some kind of Gulf-styled coalition like in the 1991 case, what was it, 42 nations, 40 plus nations joined the US in its coalition against Saddam Hussein. I don't think this is a very tenable, sustainable situation. Okay, you can take Karg Island, but then what? Like, the Iranians will just redirect supply. Also, by interfering so much in the Persian Gulf, you're going to put huge swathes of the contingency plans the Saudis and Emiratis have put in place, right? I don't know the exact details, but the Saudis have obviously developed alternative supply routes for oil, energy out of the Gulf, up through the Suez or across Saudi Arabia proper, and so on. So what does that mean? If the Americans do this, then they just make all those pipelines and contingency plans legitimate targets for the Iranians to strike. So I can't see how this is going to be very welcomed by the Saudis, by the Gulf states. Maybe they're in on it and we don't know, and it's all absolutely covert. But I personally think that any operation in this area is going to be almost entirely unilaterally done by the United States. I don't even really and I don't even know where to begin when it comes to Israel. I don't think the Israelis are going to commit sort of ground forces to this operation. They're caught up and focused on Lebanon right now. So this is a sole decision, a sole occupation, action, operation, whatever, by the Trump administration, by the United States of America. And I mean, it makes the microstates, Kuwait, Qatar, seriously vulnerable. The US has a massive military base, which the Iranians warned the US they would target in their strikes back in July, right? They told them directly, get your staff out because we're going to target this base. And they didn't actually want any casualties on the US side because they didn't want the war to escalate. So Trump has seen that the Iranians will telegraph very clearly their intentions and their desire to avoid genuine escalation, right? It allows both sides to claim a win. It's that measured escalation thing we've talked about before. But in this case, Trump just seems so beside himself with rage. He's so there's a particular word I want to use. He's so engulfed with his obsession to get a win or force the capitulation of the Iranians or whatever, that he is unwilling to back down. This is literally a game of chicken. And this bloke is the worst possible one I can imagine, right? It's sort of like having someone like Andrew Tate trying to run the show because he's got a massive, fragile ego, so insecure. I mean, at least Napoleon was a sort of a strategist, right? He had, some people claim he had an inferiority complex, although he was the average height for the time. That's a massive common misconception that he was short for the time. He wasn't. He was the average height, actually slightly above it. Fun fact. But anyway, my point being is that we can't have someone worse than Donald Trump. But I guess we wouldn't be in this situation if it was anyone other than Donald Trump. I don't think even J.D. Vance would do this. I'm just spitballing. I said, I made that video a few days ago where I just freestyled in my hatred or whatever criticisms of Trump, and some of you said just do it. So I'm kind of doing it now. I often try to prepare a script or have some kind of talking points, but I've largely exhausted all of them. So I'm just freestyling in response to what the colonels have both said. Yeah, I just don't see how much higher we can keep going. How far can this go before we really are? It's a Gulf war. It's a regional conflict. It's not World War III, but Trump seems intent on pushing the boundaries as much as he possibly can. And I just don't know. I just don't know how far it can go. Let's look at some of the updates. How about that? That'll help me That's where we let's get some direction to this stream. So Caroline Levitt, who I don't know what, I'd love to know what she actually thinks. I'd love to know what some of the administration genuinely think. As the press secretary, she has to deliver the message regardless. She has to toe the line, but surely she has, like, you know, some reservations, some limits of, like, but she's literally just said only Donald Trump, quote, knows where things stand and what he will do. I mean, no shit, I suppose, but that was the other thing. Actually, I'm going to do some coverage of the election in Hungary. I've been chatting to some of Viktor Orban's cabinet or political and communications team. JD Vance is currently in Hungary to help with the re-election of Viktor Orban, who's been in power for 16 years, mind you, very democratic. But I think that this is, if it wasn't clear where the priorities are of the Trump administration before, if they've ever tried to bullshit that they, you know, we value our European, no, you don't. You're hanging out with the one person who's possibly the most unpalatable in the European area. I'm not necessarily supportive of every other leader in Europe, but Viktor Orban is a wannabe autocrat who has influenced the political system of Hungary for over 16 years. No one should be in power for that long if they want to call the country a democracy. And from anyone I know in Hungary, the country has not improved. But anyway, JD Vance is in Hungary, and he has been making all sorts of comments about this as well, which I find interesting because for the first, 3-4 weeks, he was relatively muted on the whole conflict. And even now he's sort of very limitedly, he's not saying much. He's just sort of stating the official lining that this is the intentions, this is what the US intends to do. He's not really adding any of his personal opinion about it. And I think that's because he is largely completely opposed to what is happening. It goes against a lot of what he stands for. But he said that the US has, quote, tools in our toolkit that we so far haven't decided to use. The president of the US can decide to use them, and he will decide to use them if Iranians don't change their course of conduct. Then there were suggestions that he had talked about using nuclear weapons. The White House said literally, quote, nothing that Vance had said implied that was the case. I can't believe we're talking about it, to be honest, guys. Every time I keep talking about it, you know, I've covered Ukraine a lot in the past 4 years. I've been on the front lines. I've seen things from my own eyes. And the notion that, you know, Putin would ever use a nuclear weapon is insane. It is nuts. He is a horrible, vile leader, but he's not insane. And he's not going to use a nuclear weapon. But, you know, in this regard, I genuinely wonder, is Trump so obsessed or like just consumed by this situation and the lack of direction of where it's going? Is he actually going to use that? Usually I just be like, no, that's completely preposterous. But in this regard, I'm like, I don't know. The guy's effectively said genocide against ancient civilization in Iran. So what else can he say? But anyway, let's wrap up, I think, with a couple of takeaways. What I would say is simply that if Trump's going to try to do more than what the broader administration are aware of, I think that he wouldn't be able to do that. I think he is constrained by certain checks and balances. And the other thing is that there's a copious amount of ambiguity around all of this. The United States reported earlier that it had conducted strikes on Karg Island, but the Iranians have claimed that no damage has been done to any critical infrastructure. So who do you believe? Now, as someone coming from the West, you would assume that sort of I intend to believe Western intelligence or Western claims, but that was usually in the case of situations where they're not directly involved. The United States was accurate in stating that Russia would invade Ukraine on February 24th. But in this regard, because of this new administration, I don't know how much to take them at face value. And that certainly doesn't mean I'm sort of taking the IOGC statements at face value, but anything that we read, anything that is suggested, that something has been hit or obliterated or severely set back is either not true or severely overblown or something else. And I wonder if we are going to see an operation to take out the bridges. What are the scenarios? Take out bridges and critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure, regardless of if it's military related or not. Launch a ground offensive for Karg Island, a naval operation around the Strait of Hormuz, or maybe any one combination of those, or all out red button time. Again, I don't know, but that's sort of what we're looking at. So, I mean, I've been streaming now for about 3.5 hours, guys, on and off. So I am probably going to take a break. I'm not a natural streamer. I tend to prefer to pre-record what I say because I'm better at delivering my thoughts with some clarity. But the nature of what we're seeing requires this update in real-time coverage. So yeah, let me know if you like the streams, and I'll do more of them. What I am actually wondering is whether or not to split them into breaks, to do like a stream with a guest and then log off, or just have one continuous stream and people join us and come and go as we've done with the two kernels. Let me know. But yeah, that's what I'm wondering, Marja. Am I going to stay up the whole night? I'm in London, back in London now from Tunisia. So 8 p.m. Eastern Standard will be 1 a.m. my time. Now, I have a bad tendency of staying up super late anyway. I've been rewatching 2.5 Men, if some of you know that series. It's quite funny. And I find it helps me mentally navigate these times, or find the balance between what I'm seeing on the news and escapism. Used to watch it as a kid. Not like real young kid. I'm not Jake's, but teenager or whatever. So I was already exposed to some of the realities of Charlie Sheen and stuff. But yeah, anyway, I'll probably do more streams. We've got a couple of guests interesting tomorrow. We're going to host General Wesley Clark, as I said. And I'm going to New York in theory next week for some very exciting engagements as well. So if there's anyone you want to see, then do drop a comment. As always, super thanks, and those sorts of things can help me see your comments more likely, because I've had a lot of comments from you guys. So yeah, if you want to support the show, and if you're new here, well, consider subscribing if you want some genuine critical analysis. I'm not saying it's objective, but it is critical. I'm just some crazy old man ranting, trying to have some sleep. Not really, just airing realistically what's going through my mind. I think some people don't appreciate how difficult it is. I don't know how Daniel Davis does his streams as long as he does, or some other people upload and post as often as they do. I do this all largely on my own, so it's pretty hectic. And sometimes it means that you're struggling to know what to say next because you might have repeated yourself. But anyway, we'll see you soon, everyone. Thanks a lot for your time. Subscribe if you haven't already. Give the video a like. It helps me see more on YouTube. And subscribe to the other channel as well, because I stream to both the main channel and the podcast channel. And if you want real uptime dates or more blunt analysis, then follow me on Substack or X. But otherwise, guys, stay safe tonight, and hopefully see you on the other side. Ta-ra.